So I am really excited to be here tonight with these two amazing presenters. What I really like about tonight is that we're really talking about that intersection where policy and evidence meets practice. And really talking about the practice part tonight is Robin. And I had the good fortune of working with Robin in a project where she implemented feedback with her leadership team over the period of, it's been almost 2 years now. And she'll talk more to that, but I'll just give a brief introduction to Robin. So Robin is a support teacher. That's the name that it's provided for in Queensland, which is like an instructional leader in other states. So she's in charge of teaching and learning at Our Lady Help of Christians Primary School, or OLHOC. She's a teacher with over 20 years experience working in both the state and the Catholic education systems in Cairns in North Queensland. So she's very skilled in pedagogical practices and she's very passionate about evidence-informed practice. She acts as an instructional coach at her school and she has a deep knowledge after that many years in the primary sector in teaching reading and writing. So Robin is an extremely strong advocate for professional learning communities. I myself hold them close and dear to my heart, and curriculum development that has an impact on students' learning. So her education qualifications include a Bachelor of Education and a Master's in Education in Curriculum and Pedagogical Leadership. And she's very passionate about educational research, staff, student wellbeing and lifelong learning. So welcome, Robin. It's a delight to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm very excited about being here as well. Thank you. Pleasure.
And also joining us from the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership is Anisha Ghani. Now, Alicia has the same role that I had 6 years ago, which is that of the exact same title, which is amazing. Great to have you here. That's of Senior Project Officer in the School Leadership team. So, but apart from that, and so in that, and she'll explain a bit more about her role with us here tonight. So she's focused in on leading the work on teacher effectiveness and high quality professional learning. So you can see a strong intersection between her and Robin's work. So she's working at that policy level and Robin is working on the ground. But what Anisha does bring to this role, which I think is wonderful for AITSL, and I'm sure they benefit so much from this, is that she has over 7 years of teaching experience, and this is at the secondary level with a real focus in on literacy and numeracy development, and she's taught not just in Australia but also in Singapore as well. So, and she's had a range of different roles, including curriculum leader, mentor and pre-service supervising teacher. So she brings that real depth of experience to her policy role. So she's really, in her current role, she consults and collaborates, and I know this part well, with a wide range of stakeholders, and that's one of the benefits of working, I think, at AITSL, to strengthen quality teaching practices that positively impact educational outcomes for people across Australia. So welcome, Anisha. We're so pleased to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm excited to be here as well.
Thank you. Great. So I would like to acknowledge that myself and Anisha are meeting on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Robin will be acknowledging the country that she's meeting on in her context description. And we acknowledge that you're meeting us from all over the world tonight. In fact, we'd love to find out where you're coming in from tonight, because I know we have registrations not just from all over Australia, from every sector, but also from across the world. So if you pop into the chat box, and I'll do my best not to get distracted by it, but I really can't promise that to be the truth. From, Sydney, awesome. Go have a nice meal for me. Wollongong, sorry, they're my people. in Victoria. Well, you're all my people. Philippines, Adelaide, Melbourne. Thank you for joining us tonight. Fantastic to have you here. Yep, I'm in lockdown with you in Melbourne. Thank you. Wow. Everywhere. Oh, this is just amazing. Okay, great to have you here. Turkey. Fabulous. Okay, sorry, too excited, but that was pretty exciting. I haven't been to Turkey, wouldn't mind. Couple years. All right, what are we going to cover tonight? We're going to cover and we want this to be as practical as possible. That's why we have Anisha and we have Robin here with us. We're going to unpack the global evidence around feedback initially. We're going to explore how Robin and her leadership team has effectively led changes in feedback in students' writing to improve learning outcomes for her students at LHOC. And we're going to answer your submitted questions. As I said before, there were 42 and we've themed those and we'll be answering them in the panel format. Saudi Arabia, welcome. Kangaroo Island, this is great. Everyone's here tonight. All right, fantastic. So here is the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. What we have here are the headline figures around feedback. So we can see that the cost is quite low for feedback. It's a cost of $1 sign. So that's very low. That's up to $4,000 per year of a class of 25 students, or less than $160 per student per year. It has a high evidence security of 3 out of 5. There's only one that has 5 out of 5, which is phonics. So it's a moderate evidence. So 2 evidence reviews, including studies with relevant outcomes. And it has, what's most exciting, I think, about feedback and the potential of feedback, and I think is why Robin and her team really jumped on this, is, wow, look at the impact we can have on our students' learning. So up to 8 months worth of learning progress in addition to the normal learning for that school year. We are talking amazing effect sizes if this is implemented vigorously and with high thought and drawing from the evidence. So I think feedback, I'm very excited about feedback. And we've linked it here to the standards for teachers from AITSL as well, in a mapping exercise that we performed with AITSL. So here is a lovely spread of the effect sizes that are found within the toolkit. So the toolkit is a meta-analysis. So I'm a statistician. I'll get excited about things like this, like numbers. What we've got here is our mean weighted effect size. I love that it's weighted according to standard error. That I love because it's a very intelligent approach to a meta-analysis. I'm getting off point. I'm going to get back on. Kluger and Denisi is interesting. See how it's a bit lower than the rest? What they did in their analysis was they included 1/3 of studies that were focused in on praise. And that's a bit of a primer to our next slide. So what I would love from you all from across the world, including Turkey and Philippines and everyone in Australia, is to type into the chat box how you define feedback. And once you've defined feedback, or in the same answer as well, type in what do you think are the different categories of feedback you can give to a student. So I just mentioned one before as being praise. Think if you can think of other ones. Now, while you're having a think about that, and the first brave person will type in any second now, I can feel it, because teachers and professionals were very bright. Yes, great. Thank you, Emily. Explain to someone how they are tracking in a particular area of focus. Targeted, beautiful. Yes, feedback for learning, of learning, as learning. Lovely. Accuracy. Yes, it can be verbal and non-verbal. Gestures can tell a lot. I've got a lot of gestures, I always do. Constructive criticism, constructive as in it's leading to the next steps. Ongoing. Peer feedback, love peer feedback. Process feedback. This is amazing. Thank you, everyone. 2 stars and a wish. I love 2 stars and a wish. I think that's good for the workplace too.
Yeah.
I like 2 stars and a wish for my life. And what I also wanted to point out too, you can see the authors on this article here that we wrote with Robin. So I wanted to just call out them as well as being involved in the project. So we've got Luke Felstead and Eliza Dingle from Robin's School from Olhock. And we also have Dr. Jack Leggett and Dr. Stephanie McMahon from the Science of Research and Learning Centre that were involved with this work. Fantastic, guys. Praise, feedback on process. Oh, who's Catherine's nailed it. She's got the praise, she's got the feedback on process, and for self-regulation. I'm going to speak to the next slide, but Catherine could. All right, so this is the slide. This is what we worked up in response to the specific project that Robin was leading in her school, looking at writing at a primary level. And what we have here are the different levels of feedback. And I want to say this is a guide because for some students will need more praise. I was saying before, 2 stars and a wish is good. And for some students that have overcome various different challenges, it's fine to continue with a bit more praise than for others, as long as we don't overdo it. So well done, this is excellent work. Everyone loves to hear that, but we know that that's not that effective in comparison to task feedback, and that's really related back to the success criteria and the learning intentions, and Robin will speak to that. Process, so how have you actually gone about this task? And that's going to have pedagogical content knowledge that's very specific to that area. And Robin will speak about that in terms of writing. And then we have self-regulation as well. And that's really about how do you monitor your own progress through a task. And this, I think, has become more and more important in a COVID-19 pandemic situation that we're currently facing throughout the world, but in particular in Melbourne, where we've moved back to remote learning, is that how can students regulate their own learning through a task? So this is an example. We also have produced other examples as well. Here is just quick definition on feedback. I don't want to linger too long because I love your answers to feedback, really. And we'll be sending the slide deck out. So we know what it is. I think you guys have a nice grasp of it. And I like that you brought up that it can be peer feedback as well. We know that can be very effective. So we need it to be specific and accurate and clear. Compare where they were to where you want them to be. Dylan Willems' first quote really outlined that. It's about students' growth in learning. And it's given sparingly. We don't want to overwork our teachers. Robin's currently a teacher and a leader. Anisha's been a teacher, I've been a teacher. We say, don't increase the workload. Let's just target the feedback to different areas, perhaps, than what is currently being targeted to. Less is more. Thank you, Carlo. Excellent point. All right, I'm going to hand over to Anisha now, who's going to talk through the AITSL feedback materials that we worked up in collaboration.
Perfect, thanks Tanya. So the AITSL resources were developed back in 2017 in partnership with Evidence for Learning, and they cover 3 areas. They are evidence-based practical tools to support teachers and school leaders implement effective classroom feedback practices to positively impact student learning. And these 3 areas cover research. So we've got the spotlight, as well as a fact sheet that summarizes the key details in a more user-friendly manner for teachers. And then we've got the implementation resources, which guide and support the implementation of feedback strategies in a school. They're aligned to 4 phases of implementation, starting with a readiness check for a school leadership team to identify the structures, systems, and processes in place to support implementation in their school. You then have the resources for planning along with your staff. Moving on to that is putting that plan into action with the actual implementation resources. And finally, there's the evaluation bit, which helps schools assess the impact of changes in feedback practices, and also identify the barriers and enablers in that approach that they've used within their school. The last area that the resources cover, which I personally think are really useful as a teacher, are the case studies, which cover 11 real-life, authentic Australian examples of implementation stories. And although the case studies do not capture all the amazing practices in schools, they provide a sneak peek into the process of implementation and the positive impact that it has on the schools featured. So you might see on the map here, we've tried to cover as many schools as we can. There are video and written case studies. They showcase schools across states and territories with different AITSL levels across Catholic independent government schools, and they also cover different stages of schooling. They document the school's thought process and reasons behind the strategies chosen in their context. And most importantly, they showcase the impact as you watch through the case studies, how the feedback approaches actually work in practice with real students. And that kind of sums up the AITSL resources. Tanya, over to you again.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anisha. And I think I know that they've been very well received, and they've influenced, people making a lot of good evidence-informed decisions around evidence in the classroom, which is exactly what we want policy to do. So it was very exciting collaboration to produce those. So what I'd love to start off with now, and you can see who the guests we have on here. And if we have a bit of a closer look at us, there we go, hello. I'd like to just start off with getting a bit more context of your setting, Robin. So you're an instructional leader, and that's really been focused at that primary level. So I'd love to hear a bit more about your context at the moment at OLHOC and how that feeds into this feedback story.
Thanks, Tanya. OLHOC, well, short for Our Lady Help of Christians, we're a co-educational Catholic primary school. As Tanya said, we're located in Cairns, far north Queensland, not in lockdown at the moment, so feeling it for you guys. We do educate around 560 students from prep to year 6. We are a Mercy tradition school, so that means we're founded by the Sisters of Mercy, and the school is grounded upon the land of the Gimmawaya Wallabara Yindiji people. So I am a member of the school leadership team here at OLHOC, and our research project on feedback was a team effort. And my involvement has allowed me to work with some really great people, including our principal, Luke Falstead, and my dear colleague, Elisa Dingle, who are also the co-authors you mentioned in the article. We were given an opportunity to engage in the research project known as the Research Partners School Program, and this was initiated by QCEC, the Queensland Catholic Education Commission. And our school-based project linked us with Dr. Stephanie McMahon and Dr. Jack Leggett from the University of Queensland, yourself, Tanya, through Evidence of Learning. And our intervention was actually based on the AITSL Spotlight on reframing feedback to improve teaching and learning, along with a case study. The case study we chose was the Woonora Public School. I always have to look at that name to pronounce it correctly. Which we chose that case study because the setting and the criteria of that school was similar to ours, like the ICSIA scale, and was similar to ours. So as you know already, our feedback project focused on writing. And I just wanted to provide some more context around the improvement work that we had actually been doing here at the school prior to engaging in the project. And it went for a period of about 3 years, and it was actually in response to our 2015 NAPLAN writing data. We worked on implementing consistent evidence-based teaching strategies in writing, targeting really the literacy skills. And it was sort of a pragmatic approach, so it did align with the Australian curriculum. We made sure that writing was seen as a cognitive and a procedural skill. We gave emphasis to grammar, text structure and spelling, high value placed on correctness, so there's some feedback there, and relatively small range of text types practiced in each year level. Lots of practical and hands-on activities with written language. We did use exemplary models, and we got teachers actually to write scripts as exemplary models to illustrate good writing. And we did use exercises to build student schema through repetition and imitation. Vocabulary, writing prompts were all used. We did focus on language required for success. So we did use those terms, difficult and challenging, for example, with spelling lists or vocab lists and things like that. So we used an assessment for writing that we refer to as our unaided writing task. And this has 10 writing criteria and for 3 text types only: narrative, persuasive, and informative. So I just wanted to explain that the impact of our prior implementation and improvement over those previous last 3 years did actually improve our NAPLAN writing results, which were then above and beyond the state and national averages. So very happy with that outcome. However, the feedback was something that we noticed teachers were sort of craving. So I suppose I'll go into a little bit more of that. I think there was another question around what strategy. So is that okay? I'll go into that a little bit deeper.
Beautiful. Thank you, Robin. And for those of us in our international audience, so NAPLAN is our national assessment and program reporting program. So it's a standardized test that we perform throughout Australia. So it's a benchmark for literacy measures. And what's nice about that is that it is consistent. So that's administered by a CARA. And also EXIA as well for any international people. That's an SES. So that's a measure of socio-economic advantage. It's quite a complex. Oh, sorry, I get excited. It's a bit of, it's a complex construct that's also taken from parental demographic information as well, and has been through several iterations. Now, Anisha, thank you very much, Robin, for that deep dive into your context, because I think it really sets the scene into how you approached the focus in on the feedback. And I'd like to hear from you, Anisha, too, a bit about the work that you're currently undertaking at AITSL and what are your key focus areas currently?
Sure, thanks, Tanya. I think for the benefit of our international audience, I might just explain a little bit more on what AITSL does. At AITSL, so the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership, it's kind of a mouthful. We work with the education community to maximize the impact of teaching, school leadership, and initial teacher education on young people across Australia. And we do this through a variety of ways, particularly by providing direct support to teachers and leaders through the development of resources via our website and social media. And in my role, I work with the teaching and school leadership team, and I have the privilege of drawing on my teaching experience to consult and collaborate with teachers and school leaders amongst a wide variety of stakeholders to strengthen quality teaching practices. The projects that I currently work on, so in my role, I'm actually really lucky to be working on projects that are really close to my heart. They're mainly aimed at helping teachers identify and strengthen their effectiveness in the classroom across all career stages. And together with my team, I'm able to do this, like I said, by developing evidence-based resources and tools, particularly to promote quality induction practices and mentoring support for beginning teachers. We look at identifying effective classroom observation strategies, including providing better feedback for students on their learning. And we also look at how to enable this by promoting a whole school approach to ongoing high quality professional learning for teachers and leaders, which is essentially really useful in any kind of change within a school. And that's a little bit about me.
Beautiful. That sounds like a very full plate, Anisha, but a wonderfully full plate full of important work. I especially like the focus in on the professional learning and also on induction, which we know can be incredibly crucial and is very difficult as well, I think, to manage Australia-wide and to think about that. Now, so what we've done, we've taken all your questions and we've themed them up, and I'll be asking Robin and Anisha to answer those questions for you here tonight. So a lot of the questions that we started off with, we've covered off a little bit in the beginning introduction from myself, but I'd really like to hear from our key panelists here tonight. What do you think are some of the most effective practices that are evidence-based in feedback? And what role do you think assessment really plays within this? And I'll start with you, Anisha. What do you think are some of the key takeaways from the Spotlight piece that AITSL produced in collaboration with ourselves and in the case studies around feedback?
Yeah, so like you mentioned before, Tanya, the Spotlight reiterates the message that research shows improving feedback practices significantly improve student learning. And the Spotlight actually delves deeper into exploring what effective feedback looks like and how these practices can be used effectively in schools. The underlying message of this Spotlight tells us that feedback should essentially identify and help continuously drive a student's understanding or performance towards a learning goal. And then it goes on to explore what effective feedback looks like. So delving into two evidence-based models, we've got Hattie and Timperley's feedback model and Black and Williams' formative assessment model. Both models highlight that feedback must answer one or more of three question stems. So where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? And these three questions stems, I'm sure, Robin, you're going to be talking a little bit more about it, but are really useful in guiding feedback practices. And then you've got Black and Williams' model that describes a little bit more on 5 key strategies for formative assessment or feedback, if you like, which shows teachers what feedback processes should focus on. And that goes from clearly defining goals, so clarifying, sharing, and understanding learning intentions and criteria for success, eliciting that evidence of learning, teachers being able to engineer classroom activities according to that, which then enables a teacher to provide constructive feedback for the student that moves the students forward while activating students as instructional resources for each other. And I know some of the people in the audience mentioned peer feedback earlier. And lastly, it's also about getting the child themselves to be self-directed owners of their own learning. So the Spotlight kind of sums that model up. We also talk about the 4 levels of feedback: task, process, self-regulation, and the self. I'm not going to go deeper because Tanya, you've covered that earlier. But I think I might also emphasize that both models talk about the most powerful level of feedback being student self-regulation, so that the student is able to self-monitor, direct, and manage their actions. But like I mentioned earlier, the case studies actually do bring out quite a bit more on the implementation side of this evidence. A lot of it is reflected from different schools' contexts, but I would say that the 2 key takeaways from them would be prioritizing feedback and embedding it in the school culture. So for example, like Robin mentioned earlier, the Winona Public School highlights the importance of developing a whole school approach and learning culture for pedagogy and feedback, and that was really critical in changing the mindset of staff and students on feedback practices to ensure a consistent experience for their students and a common language for teachers to discuss about students' progress and outcomes. The second key takeaway from the case studies would be the importance of professional learning and collaboration. So there is a case study on teachers at Rosny College who have worked collaboratively in professional learning communities or professional learning teams to build knowledge about effective feedback practices and to trial and refine strategies in their classrooms. And that's also an essential ingredient to making a change in feedback practices in the school.
Beautiful. That, yeah, it was so well summarised. And what I like is that the piece broke down the 2 different models from Hattie and Timperley and William and Black and kept them separate, and the detail that you've provided on those pieces, and then the implementation piece, which is really what we'll have Robin speak to now. So Robin, in drawing on some of those materials and points that Anisha's made, and I know that you use the Spotlight piece yourself in implementation, can you go into how did you actually proceed with implementing feedback targeted at students' writing?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. So I guess we needed to first of all find out, despite the success that we were experiencing in writing, we still needed to find out more about the fact that teachers were sort of saying to us the students were relying on them to approve their planning and ideas, and this was sort of a bit concerning. You know, each teacher has experienced this before. You've taught strategies for writing and you think you've done a cracking job, and then you get the drafts in and they're riddled with errors, and you want to set up an approach. You need to set up an opportunity, sorry, to provide feedback for writing, because what you don't want to do is create this long train line at your desk of, you know, conferencing, or the aching arm from keeping your hand up, you know, waiting for the teacher to come to you. So with assistance from the Research Partner Schools program, Elisa, Luke and I, we sort of developed a hunch here at Old Hock that students lacked metacognitive skills to improve their writing. And we thought this could explain that dependency on their teachers' approval. So we recognised that students were not self-monitoring and self-regulating to achieve any writing goal. Instead, waiting for their teachers to spoon feed them to sort of every step of the way. So we actually chose an intervention approach which aimed to build teacher capacity in effective feedback and to develop shared understandings with just 2 year levels. So we have 3 classes per year level, and we chose the year 4 and the year 2 teachers, which actually equated to 7 teachers. And our intervention was to give them some professional development on self-regulation and metacognition. And my research project team here at Old Hock and we sort of drew upon, like Anisha just mentioned, Hattie and Timperley's model of effective feedback, as they suggested that improving feedback practices could bridge that assessment and learning together. So our aim was to employ strategies to empower student metacognitive skills and self-regulation in writing. We chose 3 high impact feedback strategies based on their effect sizes, and we supported the idea of turning such evidence into tools for teachers as a key to evidence-based teaching. So the first one we chose, the first high impact strategy we chose was borrowed from Hattie in learning intentions and success criteria. So starting with the lesson and a clear learning intention and success criteria, which explicitly describes what success looks like, is what we found was of greatest importance. And we supported our teachers in writing them and being really clear about what they were and what they wanted the students to learn. The second strategy that we implemented and upskilled our teachers in was in bump up walls, and we've borrowed that from Sharrett. So for those of you who are unsure about a bump up wall, it's a visual display of something rich in performance. So ours was in writing. So it's a visual display on a wall, and it displays level 1 might look like, it'll show what level 1 might look like, what level 2, level 3 is sort of the expected level, and level 4 would be the highest level. So it goes right into, depending on what your focus is in for your writing lesson, it goes right into a sentence level, or it might go right into vocab, and it's a very clear display of that. The idea of the bump up wall is that it's the student's job to make meaning from their schoolwork using and controlling their own thought processes. So, which I guess is self-regulation and was what we were aiming to do. Our third feedback strategy were the question stems that Anisha was referring to before from Hattie and Timperley. And we borrowed that from their Visible Learning Plus resource. These 3 questions, how am I going, where am I going, where to next, we got teachers to use with students to create a dialogue between teachers and students. So the dialogue generated from these question stems created an opportunity for internal and external feedback to have impact on students' schema, and again, to help students with their self-regulation. This follow on from here allows students to decide on their next learning goals. So that third question, where to next, and allows teachers to devise tactics and strategies to reach them. So when they sort of can articulate where to next, the teacher then has that information of where can they take the lesson to next. So our learning as a research team is that when teacher feedback is joined with student internal input, and they have some internal thoughts about it, students can decide where their goals, their learning goals will go, and this makes success more achievable for them.
Right. What? Was there something else?
No, No, you didn't cut me off. Sorry. I didn't mention anything about the assessment. Sorry. I did forget to mention that. Sorry. So we worked out that improving teacher understanding of feedback improved student self-regulation, which would improve student editing and reviewing attempts. So having an overall impact on their end result, which would be assessment. So from here, we made, from here, we then used the end product, which was the assessment, as the culmination of what was learned by the student. And in this case, you can assume that it's been taught by the teacher to a certain extent. So the separation of feedback from assessment initially in our project was possibly the point of realization for our teachers that we targeted in our project, because I think that separation from that end result, getting the feedback at the end result to feedback as we go through was really quite powerful. So, and overall, this actually showed, our post-data results actually showed huge improvements in the students' general writing task performance. But in addition, in the year 4 year level, they really focused their teaching in on vocab, and that also showed great growth and improvement in their assessment tasks at the end.
Yeah, and they were lovely. It's like it was a large percentage of growth in the effect sizes that were above 0.4 for those cohorts. So really lovely data that came out of that, which you can read in more detail in our Teacher Magazine piece. Well, what I like there is that the goal there was really, and I can see it decreasing teacher workload in the end, because you won't have that large queue standing at your desk, because you're pushing students to be the agents of their own learning and really taking a look at what are they doing, what do they need to adjust through the power of learning intentions and success criteria, through the power of the bump it up wall, which has explicit examples. I know myself, there's nothing better than an example, is there, to let you know really what you need to produce. And it's so helpful for students. And I like that the double focus in on the vocabulary, which we know is essential within writing, and targeting the self-regulation. So exciting. So I get very excited that evidence has turned into action, and that's turned into students learning, because that's the whole reason I wake up in the morning. So thank you, Robin.
Thanks.
So apart from my excitement, we got some other questions, which are really quite some specific ones about some other strategies, and we've touched on, I loved the connection between assessment, and we're really talking about ongoing formative assessment, which is really Dylan Willem cornerstone work. And also, but now we had a lot of specific questions, say, about the use of exit slips, or about, is it better to give verbal feedback? Is it better to give written feedback? What is the best way to give feedback in any type of environment? And what's the best timing? Is it best to be immediate? Is it best to have a delay? And so I'll start off with you, Anisha, and just ask you, what does the evidence say around some of those pieces? And I know we're biting off large chunks tonight, but we're really trying to answer the questions that you've all sent in to us tonight.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, Tanya, because I recall when I was back in the classroom, having a range of techniques that you have to deal with, like individual whiteboards, data walls, exit slips. Just choosing the right one can be really challenging at times. But before I go on to what the evidence says, I might just add a caveat here that it's really important for us as educators to combine our professional judgment with what the research tells us in deciding on what techniques to use for providing feedback. So going back to the evidence itself, firstly, we know that timing is key, and this is echoed in Standard 5.2 of the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, providing feedback to students and their learning. And that standard actually says that feedback should be timely, effective, and appropriate for a student relative to their learning goals. And it's this timely feedback that then enables a student to identify the next steps required to progress in their learning and to help them get back on track. So time is obviously really crucial. I might then tie this back to some of the points I mentioned earlier on what the evidence tells us. So firstly, I think simply put, the evidence says that we should not leave our students hanging. If they're going to be asking themselves how they're going, our feedback should then be provided to them in a timely, actionable manner, and should help direct them on the steps to take next. But as we all know, teachers juggle many tasks and thoughts in one lesson on top of managing the classroom itself. What more remembering to provide sufficient opportunities for feedback. And at times it can be rather tricky to get feedback from students in that timely manner that I mentioned. So when time is a barrier, harnessing other forms of feedback, such as peer feedback, through the use of rubrics, drawing on success criteria prior to that conference with you, might actually enable better outcomes for both the student and the teacher. And secondly, the evidence also tells us that providing feedback to students should actually be fit for purpose. So thinking about it, it's not just about whether it's verbal or written, but it's a matter of deciding what is the best mode of feedback in line with the level of feedback that is being provided to that child. And obviously in more recent circumstances, I'm sure we all understand, that with COVID, we're also starting to see audio feedback being really valued, especially when teachers can record their feedback comments using a range of audio tools. And the student is then able to go back to the comments to regulate their own learning at home. So I think that sort of pretty much sums a little bit of my opinion on what the evidence says, Tanya, but I'm sure Robin would have a lot more to say from the classroom.
Thanks so much, Anisha. And I really like the way you were talking about, it's really a combination of, and that's why we always use the term evidence-informed practice, because it's evidence meeting a practitioner of where they're at in their classroom and where their students are at. It's also, if you're, say, in a high school setting and you have 120 students that you are responsible for, well, peer feedback, fantastic. Cut down on your marking workload while increasing their ability to understand a rubric. That's a win-win, people. And apart from that, I really like the way you talked about recording voice snippets in the current COVID pandemic. We're in lockdown again in Melbourne. I know an example of that. And it can have sort of a dual benefit. My husband works in the primary sector, and so he's been reading storybooks online to his students. And what that has done, and some of the students have reported back that they're playing them over and over again just to have the comfort of hearing the voice of an educator in their room. So it can have a social emotional benefit as well. And also tone is important, as we know, in receiving feedback. So if we can target the feedback and make it, say, 2 stars and a wish, and then have the tone correct, we can get that across more succinctly, and it can be really useful for those students too with language backgrounds other than English, and those with additional learning needs as well. So thanks a lot for highlighting the current context as well, Anisha, really helpful. And so I'll hand to you, Robin. What do you think in terms of those specific questions? What has worked for you in your setting?
Yeah, so I just would like to talk about what we did in the project particularly, because what we realised as a team is that we didn't really know what we didn't know. So we didn't know what feedback was given. So our research project actually required us to collect qualitative and quantitative data first. I know that excites you, Tanya. So with consent from so with consent from our Year 4 and Year 2 teachers, we observed 3 to 4 30-minute writing lessons, and we then, in those 30 minutes, we wrote down every feedback phrase that the teacher made or gave during the writing lesson, and we called that our scoreboard. So we wrote that onto a scoreboard. And at this stage of our research, teachers didn't know what we were writing down. So that didn't affect our data collection. They knew we were coming to observe, but they didn't know what. We sort of had a really trusting relationship. We weren't going to do anything, write anything that they weren't going to find out about later on. So that was all very clear and transparent. Elisa, Luke and I then analysed each of the feedback phrases and scored them according to the task, process, self-regulation or praise criteria. And what we found our pre-data analysis showed, was that the majority of feedback that the students received from their teachers was coded as task feedback. So it must be maybe things like, maybe just fix your spelling, or is that how you spell that word, or don't use that word, and they give them a different word, or have you checked your punctuation? So, and then next our data did show us the next level of high frequency criteria was praise. So things like good girl, great answer, very good, thank you, well read, that's all right, you know. So the lower frequency of teacher feedback on process and self-regulation indicated that we did need to focus on what are the strategies that our students could show us that our students could perform the task using self-monitoring to achieve their sort of learning goal. These sort of qualitative and quantitative data supported our hypothesis in our project, which was that students did lack the metacognitive skills to improve their writing. And just connecting with what Anisha was referring to before about the timing of the feedback, here at Olhock, we like to call it just-in-time feedback. And that was sort of our aim. So given at the right time, in the right way, feedback can actually self-direct and motivate our learners. So following the intervention, which was to build the capacity of our teachers, the teachers were able to set goals for themselves. And some of them videoed and watched their own teaching and started to gather data around their own feedback and self-awareness of their use of questioning. A few of the teachers did comment that they were using it in all areas of their teaching and felt that the intervention, which was the professional development, had completely changed their practice. In addition, the teachers set a goal to co-create writing, and I just saw a comment before in the chat box about this, co-creating success criteria and writing them with your students does help improve feedback, and because they're sort of buying into it. And that was focused in on, and that will focus in on their learning and assist them to seek clarity about their writing, which what I'm saying is needed to for improvement and, you know, meeting writing goals. So I think that's about all that I had to say on that one.
That's beautiful. What I love there is that where you started from is practice-based evidence. So is what's happening at our school. Yeah. Okay, we've got a hunch. We think that our students aren't doing particularly well with self-regulation and metacognition. How can we see if teachers are actually giving feedback on that? And you made observations, so then you could base and say, yep, we know that teachers could be giving more feedback targeted to those areas. And I know that you had a look after as well, didn't you? And did you see an improvement in the teachers' use of feedback targeted to those areas? Sorry, I've just thrown that in there.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so the teachers did, like I said, change their way of approaching it. So, and like I said, it wasn't just in writing then, it was in their teaching generally. And one of the comments I think we've captured was in a post interview with our teachers was that I just teach completely different now. I didn't realize how much I was spoon feeding them and I was doing all the work. You know, we need to pare that back so that the thinking happens with the student. And those question stems, if you want to start doing this, is if you can just put those question stems secretly on a post-it note on your board or somewhere to remind you not to keep feeding students, and just using those questions, you know, how am I going? How are you going with that? Yeah, passing that on to them.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that focus. And what I also love was you touched on the co-construction of the success criteria with the students, and that really is a nice starting point into the student voice, and then to agency, and then to leadership, which is something I'm very passionate about and being fortunate to be involved in as well. So that I think is a really good way if schools are thinking, how can we branch out into agency as well? there is a fantastic way to engage your students in their learning, because we really want that agency piece to be heading towards learning. I've gone on a different tangent, but love agency, so important. All right, so we've touched on meeting, I think, different students at where they're at, and just looking at the time as well. I think what we'll do, I'll get you to do a double barrel, ladies. If you can talk about how do you think we can meet all the students in our classroom with feedback, and then end off with, say, the most critical takeaways about feedback that you'd like to give as well. So we know we've got a diverse learning needs in every single classroom. If I start off with you, Anisha, how do you think we can meet those diverse needs, and then key takeaways from tonight?
Yep. So I think the first thing that pops to mind, Tanya, is Standard 1 of the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. So knowing your students and how they learn, which I feel is the most important thing when talking about meeting diverse needs of students. And in my mind, I'm sort of linking it to what Johnny Hedier said in his research, that evidence shows teachers account for about 30% of the variance in students' achievements. And it's what teachers know, do, and care about, which is very powerful in the learning equation. So drawing on that, I would say that the first step to meeting diverse learners' needs is to recognize and appreciate their differences and be able to identify through the right forms of evidence where they're at in their unique learning journeys. It's about considering their prior understanding and skills to determine the stage of learning that they've reached, and then identifying those gaps and establishing learning goals with them, like we've heard, co-creating those goals with the student. And obviously feedback plays such a crucial role in this form of differentiation, which is why eliciting the right types of feedback helps address the diverse needs of our students. I might end off with what Black and Williams' formative assessment model emphasizes, that research shows improved formative assessment or feedback raises the overall standard of achievement while reducing the gap between our high achieving and low achieving students. And that's what makes feedback really important. But the key takeaways that I would say on effective evidence-informed feedback, I'm just recalling your question from earlier. So key ingredients would be 3 tiers or 3 levels. The first level being the student themselves, who sits at the core of feedback. Students need to be well set up to receive feedback and see it as learning opportunities to reach their goals. They should also be aware of these clearly defined learning goals, and that's when the second level comes into play, which is facilitated by the teacher, who encourages a classroom culture that supports this and provides students with sufficient opportunities to demonstrate their learning. And then going back to that goal reference, specific, authentic, and constructive feedback for the student. But lastly, the third tier would be the school. And I think it's really important for that whole school culture that supports effective feedback practices. And I know we constantly dump a whole lot on school leaders, and I'm conscious of what's expected of them. But in all honesty, the role of the school leader enables this culture, and it's through the school leader themselves that you're then able to prioritize feedback practices and invest in the ongoing high quality professional learning of teachers in the school and other staff, and providing that opportunities for collaboration among staff to develop and work towards that evidence-based culture.
Definitely, leaders are essential. Thank you, Anisha. I'm just looking at the time, or else I would give more feedback on that. I'll hand over to you, Robin, and ask for your how do we reach diverse learners, and then your takeaways from tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. So instruction must be differentiated as well as feedback. So at AITSL here, we believe that all students can learn. So having that sort of attitude to start with is something that all students will experience. They will experience growth in their learning. Feedback must always suit the differentiated instruction and task. So diverse learners need to self-regulate as well, and they can also they can do this, and you can see behind me, I purposely sat here today because one of the strategies that we use at our school is walls that talk. So sort of referring to the bump it up wall, but anything that goes on the wall here has to have a purpose, that it can do some ongoing teaching. So I am sitting in front of some vocabulary words and some phonics and grapheme and phoneme words, correspondence charts. I think there's a vowel chart behind me there and some R-controlled vowels and lots of exciting Schwart words. So routines around how to use these walls that talk is also really important for diverse learners. I'm fortunate enough to run a spelling group, and these students in my group, the audience may be aware of a program called Spelling Mastery. Well, these students don't place in a level of spelling mastery, so they can present as quite challenging to teach spelling to. And possibly you need to sell the subject as well. Like, you know, spelling may not be one of their favorite things to learn. However, the way that I've sort of approached it is to teach them about their brains. And I do want to give a sort of a plug to the Science of Learning Research Centre, because they have a really good student-based activity booklet that I actually use with this group as a fast finisher. So we set out routines. I set out routines for them, a routine, so they're a task sheet where I'm trying really hard to get them to self-regulate and monitor their own learning. Complete the task, tick it off, you get to do the early finisher, which is learning about your brain. So that's another way that sort of we can work with diverse learners. So the takeaway that you asked me to sort of finish on, feedback can be the information that drives the process, or it could actually be the stumbling block that derails the process. And I think sometimes as teachers, we take on really large sort of great ideas that are really hard to maintain and keep going. Yeah, so if the initiative is too time consuming and too hard to manage, yeah, it's probably not quite the right thing for you. And we mentioned before, working smarter, not harder. You know, we've already got a lot to do. So working, you know, making the time that we spend with these initiatives shorter would be of benefit. Feedback's also very strongly linked to motivation. So having that dialogue and relationship with your student, and, you know, I guess commenting via video or face-to-face, and making it really clear, non-judgmental, you'll go a long way.
Beautiful. I wish I've just given praise. So people don't do that in your classrooms. But it was. I'm just going to wrap up this evening, and thank you for those key takeaways from both of our speakers. They were exceptional and really demonstrated your deep knowledge of both theory and practice from both of you. So thank you so much for your time here tonight that you've generously donated. So these are some up and coming webinars that we have. So we'll be looking at literacy in secondary settings, quite exciting. My dad would be excited being a secondary English teacher. Unpacking the effective use of teaching assistants, and we'll be talking to an educator there that's implemented the effective use of teaching assistants at their school. With the secondary settings, we've got an educator there, Mark Clutton, who'll be talking about the way he approaches literacy at his school. We'll also have an educator from Monash University talking about the evidence base around that. And then for improving student behaviour, we're yet to announce all our speakers. If you want to get in touch and have any questions about this session, please feel free to reach out to me, and then I can reach out either to Anisha or to Robin, time permitting. And so there's my email there to get in touch. You'll all receive an attendance certificate within 1 week's date from today by close of business in 1 week. If you have attended, we're on the socials, which is lots of fun. That's how I met Dylan Willem. Another story for another time. We've got other webinars coming up. Subscribe to our e-news if you want a hit of statistics and all things fun every month. So thanks again to my wonderful speakers. Thanks to you all. I actually saw a lot of Vygotsky occurring, not just in the conversations here, but also on the chat, which I loved. I was really trying hard not to be distracted by, but you're all answering each other's questions in the session as well, which is fabulous. So you were acting as peers to each other's learning. So we love that and we encourage that. So it's dead on 6 o'clock, aren't we fabulous? Oh, sorry, 6:01 just then. Until next time, thanks so much, Robin. Thanks so much, Anisha. Everyone stay safe, especially those of you in Victoria and the more COVID affected areas. Stay safe until we meet again, and thank you so much.